Good
Oh, Drew, do
morning.
you have a
What
microphone?
up?
Okay,
Oh,
good.
nice.
It seems like you were a couple minutes late, similar to your acid bath time.
Are you raw from that burn, Drew?
Oh, he just closed his thing.
Off camera to just let some rage out.
Yeah. All right. Do you want to do the intro while Drew's thinking of a decent comeback to hit me with?
I'm intrigued by now Drew's third studio space that we're getting to see.
Yeah,
It's the same space.
I know, but it's a
Just a
different corner.
Different corner, yeah. All right, let me play the music loud, and then we'll go lighter, and then go ahead.
Good morning. Hello, everyone, depending on what time you're listening to this. This is the Dauntless Academy podcast, and today we are going to deliver the roast of T. Elliott Field, aka assess his coaching performance. Got to keep it balanced with last week.
How many different time zones do you think people listen to our podcast in?
Well, I can tell you one thing for certain. We are popular in India on Instagram.
Are we really?
Much I can tell you is true.
Mumbai madness.
Yeah, we do. We do.
Do you guys look at this banner?
I did notice that, a little bit distracting during my intro, but please like and subscribe. Indeed,
you handled it well. All right, Drew, what's the comeback?
I don't have any comeback
about the acid bath thing. Okay, so what is it?
It's not inaccurate.
It's hard to have comeback when you're just talking about facts.
When you're just slower.
Is it because I'm fitter than you?
Fitter than me.
Or were you just unwilling to put yourself in the same amount of pain that I'm willing to?
Probably a combination of both.
Oh.
I do feel like my transition from the ski to the row was bad, but not 3 seconds bad.
Do you know the only thing that frustrates me about that is if you would have let me help you, you could have beat my time.
You're probably. What do you mean?
I asked you before. I said, "Do you want me to help you with anything?" And you said, "Nope, I got it all figured out." And I said, "Okay." There weren't any major errors, but I just, I could have. I make people. That's the whole point, is that I make people a little bit better than they're planning. And I'm just saying, we could have chewed off a couple of those seconds. You could have beat me. We could have all been happy.
Maybe next time.
Which is an interesting thing, because people would ask me, like, are you nervous? Do you think Drew's going to beat your time or blah, blah, blah? And I'm like, I kind of need Drew to beat my time. Ideally, he beats my time, right?
In an ideal world. I sent this message to someone else the other day. I said, in an ideal world, I do 5:10.
Well, yeah. I mean, if I did what I planned, I was going to get 5:08, because I planned for a 5-minute pace time with 8 seconds of transition, like 4 seconds onto the rower and 4 seconds onto the bike, like 4 seconds on and getting up to speed. All right.
Yeah, and if I did what I planned, I would have gotten barely 7 minutes, but I broke 6:30. So
yeah.
Nice, Shannon.
I did way better than I thought. So I don't know what you guys are up to. You should set your expectations for yourselves a little bit lower, and then you can exceed them. That's what I would suggest.
If you're tuning into the podcast and have no idea what we're talking about.
If you're from Mumbai, let us catch you up.
We did a workout. It was hard. It took anywhere between 5 and 6.5 plus minutes for the people on the podcast. On the podcast.
Yeah,
people on the podcast. Other people, whatever.
And it was a burner. Okay. Drew.
Yes.
How did you approach
music off? I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's been nice. Just what's that kind of music called?
Elevator music.
Nail that too, but it's not
There's
buffer. It's another word for it.
Muzak is what what's his name said. It's a brand that makes. I don't know. Sorry.
It just makes buffer music. Anyways, Drew, how did you approach your assessment of Elliott before we get
very
into
holistically, very holistically.
it?
And it's also, I'm allowed to comment on Meg, right?
I think so. As long as you're not tearing her down when she's not here to defend herself.
No, I think
You can only compliment Meg, and
at no time am I tearing anybody down.
I
we
know.
didn't want this to happen. The only thing, you can absolutely bring her up or other coaches and stuff, but we just didn't want it to be a Meg compared to Elliott podcast and Meg not be here.
Right.
So you can like reference and stuff, but it just doesn't need to be like, but this and this. Like pretend like there are other coaches in the world other than myself and the Megatron.
Yeah, that's fine.
And I probably shouldn't even have to say that, Drew, because who has anything negative to say about Meg? I mean, seriously.
True.
Okay.
Yeah, so I have like maybe a more of a holistic approach. I'm guessing you have like spreadsheet and categories and.
Absolutely not. No. Oh. I had a lot of thoughts about it, and my approach was specific. I tried to be as specific as possible to just Elliott as my coach, because obviously now, he's been my coach for 4 years, but he's also my friend, and I love his wife and family and all of that stuff. We've competed together, so I try to stay all of that away, which is hard. And I also tend to err on the side of nice. So I'm trying to roast Elliott, but it's I may have failed on the roasting part. I do have a few things to say.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to start.
Okay.
Okay.
I think you should start, yeah.
All right. So I've got to go back into time for a minute. Into time. Because I've played a lot of sports and I've had a lot of had a lot of coaching experience, not coaching personally, but being coached. And the one thing that used to drive me crazy as a player, athlete, whatever you want to call it, was when a coach would, either in practice or before a game or something like that, would get so angry with you if you didn't have this like extrinsic and outward intensity that everybody could see. If you weren't yelling in the locker room before the game, there was something wrong with you. You know what I mean? It's like what are you doing? You got to be intense. You got to yell, all that stuff. And I was thinking about that when we were preparing for this podcast and how much I hated those people. And I was like, why would they do that? Like, what is their motivation there? And obviously, like, I understand, like, oh yeah, they're trying to get you fired up and get you motivated, but that only works for X number of people, right? For a certain percentage of people. And so when I was thinking about how to evaluate Elliott and if any other future coaches, I think it comes down to, does the coach know you as an individual and know what you need as an individual? So, if that was the case way back when, then these people who were coaching me would have been like, oh, wow, Drew doesn't respond well to me yelling at them. He's completely internally motivated anyways, so I don't need to waste my time doing that. So, like, as you probably all of the listeners in India just witnessed, that little exchange at the beginning about our times, that's Elliott's way of motivating me. It's these subtleties. He gets into my head very successfully because he knows me so well. And that,
don't tell him that. Oh,
I already know.
It's like this is not a secret.
I know.
This is not a secret. But like for me, that's what it takes to be like, okay, next time I'm either, if I'm never going to do acid bath again, but in the build up to that, I'm going to buy into his system even more because he beat me. Right. So like, If it was the old version of me, I would have been like, oh man, I got to put more time in on the rower. I got to put more time in on the ski. I got to put more time in on the bike. And then when I did the 515 the other day, I got in the car and I was like, well, gosh darn it, I've got to put more time on the weights, like get stronger. It had nothing to do with, like the endurance capacity or anything like that. Like that's all there. It's just, and that's something I think that over time I've learned from Elliott, because number one, Elliott knows what he's talking about. That's very, very clear. We talked about a little bit about this last week. Is like,
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of, if you want me to buy into something, prove it.
You got to practice what you preach. Yeah.
And show me and prove it. And that's, I think Elliott's really good with that. But I think the biggest thing that Elliott's good with is knowing the customer. Knowing the customer is not a good word. Knowing the individual that he's working with.
Yeah.
So
Well,
go ahead.
I'll just add to that. Maybe we can kind of layer our reviews on top of each other, because I have a feeling we're going to say similar things. It is one person after all. I had the same thing, and I think it highlights how good he is at, let's just say, coaching the person, right? Because I think his approach to me is very different. Very different. Like, obviously he's never going to be like, oh, can you beat my acid bath time?
Hold on. Wait, I got to interject. Drew, there were things that I wanted to say to you before acid bath that would have really accelerated or increased the chances of you beating the time or getting a better time. But I didn't want to say them in front of all of those people, because if you wouldn't have beat my time, I would have looked like a total asshole. But not to you. They would have been like, wow, that was, I'm surprised
Can you give
said
us
that.
an
And that
example?
probably,
Can you give us an example, please?
yeah, I could have, I would have just leaned a little bit into, I would have said something like, well, when Drew's halfway through the row, he's going to start to feel tired, and that's probably when he's going to start to quit. And he's unwilling to push the time, regardless of how he feels. And because halfway through the row, for most people at that speed, you start to get that like, oh shit, do I still have enough for the full effort on the bike? And
what did I say? What did I say when I was done?
And hold on, when you prime somebody like that, when you say like, hey, this is going to come, and you get a choice when that happens, he would have Drew specifically would have leaned into it and said, oh, this is what Ellie was talking about. I'm going to show him. And it would have thing. But then if the result was the same and the time was the same, the people in class would have been like, Elliot, that was kind of harsh. I hope he would never say something like that to me.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
But I was saying that was like the first thing that I said. Not the first thing that I said. There was a lot of moaning, yelling.
Yeah.
But that was like one of the first things I said afterwards. Was halfway through, I started to lose it a little bit. So maybe,
Yeah, because you skied and bike just as fast. I just rode a little faster than you, and I transitioned onto the rower a little bit faster.
Yeah. Well, perfect example of something that I don't think you would ever say to me either.
I would not
Not
say
not because people think you'd be a jerk, but because that wouldn't work for me. I'd be like,
okay,
oh, great.
I believe in
I'm
you,
just
Shannon.
waiting. I'm just waiting for the halfway through the road to die now. Yeah, so I kind of broke my assessment into two parts. One was like kind of that first year. One from like, I think the just like situation the gym was in was different, so it made Elliott a slightly different coach. But also, I was a newbie, and I think the way you coach somebody in their first year before they're like fully invested in themselves may be different from how you coach somebody, longer term or when you know them better. So, in the beginning, I didn't get a lot of that like overt mental coaching. But I didn't do a goal session until like a couple of years in, and like we talked about in the last podcast, like almost like these like therapy sessions with Elliott. So in the beginning, it was just like kind of fun. But once we got to those like goal setting sessions, that's where my personal customization, I think, came in a lot stronger. I'm sure Elliott was doing things and, keeping it fun for me in the early days, but we had this conversation in one of our first goal setting sessions where, I was like committing that I'm going to come in and be really intentional with my workouts. I'm going to not just, jump on the bike and do my 80%. Like I'm really going to hone in on holding 80% and not getting to 85, like holding it back, not dropping to 70, whatever. Being intentional in pull-up days, even though pull-ups I just usually flop down or I'm not really trying super hard. I'm going to really try to have time under tension and just be super intentional. And he said to me, like, well, if you're not showing up or if you don't stay to work on stuff after class or you're not being intentional, like am I supposed to call you out? Like he actually asked me, like, what am I supposed to do? And I said, look, if I am already screwing up, I know I'm screwing up. And there's nothing you can say that's going to make me feel worse than the voice in my head is already making me feel. So it's actually going to just add insult to injury and probably hide me away from wanting to come back. And he was like, wow, that's really helpful for me to know because that's not how I would feel. If I was screwing up, I would want someone to be like, yo, you're dragging your ass. What's going on? Probably how the approach would be with you, Drew. But for me, the exact wrong approach. And I actually had a CrossFit coach, because I asked him to, take that approach at a gym years ago. And he was so nice, but he would email me every single time I didn't come to class. Like, hey, you skipped another day. What's going on? And I just stopped going entirely because I couldn't handle that type of coaching. So I completely agree with you, Drew. He has a very customized approach once he knows the athlete. And I think he does a good job at that. I think he tends to read us well. Sometimes I hate that he reads us well, but
I agree. I think I would say, like, if you're going to give, you can't really give. I didn't come up with a number system, but Elliott is great at knowing people and figuring out people and figuring out what they need.
Yeah, I didn't do a number system either, but I kind of had like 4 areas that I thought were important. The first was positivity and enthusiasm. So just like overall having like a good vibe, like pass the vibe check. Then being sort of supportive and trusting, like creating a good environment to improve yourself. So you have to support people and then you also have to trust them to do what you've taught them. And then just respect and communication. Obviously, you have to be able to communicate your ideas and do that effectively and respectfully. And then the last one is being knowledgeable and observant. And, he knows a lot about how to program, how to move effectively. List goes on and on. But I think with that, you also have to be observant in this kind of style of coaching because you have to be able to apply that to people. That knowledge. So those are the 4 areas. And so I think that the customization kind of falls into that observant, knowledgeable, respectful, communicative, like kind of straddles those 2 areas.
Sure. Okay.
Can we get into some negative stuff? I don't want this to just be like a
brag sheet. That was my plan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I think the negative piece for me is how would I say this? Elliott is very much an extrovert, and for someone like myself who is very much an introvert, there are days where that can be not too much, but just like, okay, I get it. Let's get to business.
Mm-hmm.
There are other CrossFit gyms that I've been to that are very like, let's pack in as much as we absolutely can in this 1 hour and very like on time, and there's no chit chat, there's no community whatsoever. It's just put your head down and go. And for me, I don't care. Like I'm there I go to the gym to get stuff done, do the workout, and then go home. And now that's obviously not Elliott's approach. Elliott likes to get to know you. He likes to ask you these random weird questions at the beginning of class.
Seemingly random.
And well,
it's never actually random.
That's your opinion. And this was interesting. So when I was thinking about this episode, we had a class that we were in together the other day, you and I, Shannon, and Elliott asked some weird question.
It wasn't a weird question. It was an annoying question.
It was a weird question. And we got going on that weird question, that when he was trying to demonstrate something, pull-ups or something like that, you and I were not paying attention at all, and he had to yell at us in the middle of class. He's like,
he did.
Hey,
I must have been blackout.
He didn't yell at us, but it was he was like, guys, hold on a second. So it was one of those funny teaching things. Like, wow, if I was a teacher, I would have done this differently and not asked these weird questions at the beginning of class, because then you lose people. So I don't know. That would be my.
Yeah, you have to strike a balance, right? And I think sometimes Elliott strikes the right balance. I actually like the looseness of the, let's just say, introduction to class and coming in. I think it's easy in our environment to take yourself too seriously. And I honestly, I know the reason why I fell in love with CrossFit was because I fell in love with being at the gym. Like, I really enjoyed that. And like I said a couple weeks ago, or whenever we last talked, for me, motivating myself to get there actually ended up having nothing to do. The greatest motivation had nothing to do with, I want to, get fit and look better and lift faster. Like, in the early days, it was, I want to be part of that community. I like being there. Like, I want to be friends with these people. So I hear what you're saying, Drew, but somebody who probably wouldn't have gotten so invested and stuck with it early on, were it not for Elliott's sort of like, don't sweat the technique mentality, I think there's a place for that. Now that I'm more serious, or at least I try to take myself more seriously actively, like as part of my goals to be more intentional. If we do have like a moment to compare Elliott and Meg, just for a moment, like,
we shouldn't do that though.
Well, I know we shouldn't do that, but just as an example, like, I think, like, how can I explain this without, I don't want to compare Elliott and Meg, but it's hard to not.
But you're going to do it anyways.
Well, okay. Well,
it's just as long as you're not doing it the whole time. It was just that you can make an
I
example.
Think this is really the only place where I think Elliott and Meg are substantially different. This is truly the only place. And everywhere else, I think they're close enough aligned around coaching, else the program, the way it works, wouldn't be as effective. I mean, if we were all getting coached in different ways, but nonetheless, I think it's in that when Meg gets into, I am demoing and explaining mode, her entire body language changes. And I think that kind of demands the attention of the room in a more serious way. Whereas Elliott typically is a bit more lighthearted about it. And that's fine for me. I know, like, when my husband comes to class, he's business. Like, he used to love Coach Scott. Like, I want to hear all the instruction. I want to take it all in. And Elliott's definitely a little bit more light touch at the beginning of instruction for things. So that's my only main comparison with Meg.
I love Coach. I just want to say that I loved Coach Scott for the language.
His language was effervescent. I really liked his vocabulary.
I'd love to
so many great one-liners. Okay, go ahead. Defend yourself, Elliott.
Okay, with the topics, there are definitely classes where I'm like 30 minutes into the class and I'm like, ooh, we went a little too high on the dosage of hot topics. And I can just tell that people are kind of like, because you get all different things. It's like, you can tell, usually I'll start the class and kind of feel out the room, but like you were saying, Shannon, that is a way to build community and kind of get people to engage. Like, it's really good to be super professional and stuff like that, but we also have new people coming, and I typically do it when
Mhm.
there are newer people to show the rest of the community that they have, like, maybe we'll have 2 new people that are very timid, and then I'll just get, like, a conversation going that's easy to interject, and then I will say, like, ridiculous things to try to make it seem like, "Oh, no comments are stupid," or, like, "You can be silly," and it kind of, like, allows them to, like, "Oh, okay, like, we're not this isn't a
Yeah.
professional play here. I can riff a little bit."
It
And then
breaks the
so
ice to allow us to introduce ourselves too. I think
without
that
being
that's
like,
super important.
"Shannon's new, tell us about your life," and they're
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah. Or like going around and being like, "Everybody say what your nickname was in high school." Had a coach that did that once. It was not fun.
yeah, so it's stuff, and so for the people like Drew, it's kinda like eye rolls, like, "Oh," but then other times there will be just some serious people in class, and we're like, "Hey, you guys, I know that you guys don't want me to talk about student loans, so, like, let's just get to
I got into it with
it."
you on student loans. Oh, that was
I
the
know, I
topic.
can get you riled up usually about anything scholastic, but or, like, academic-wise, but, that that was the one point about the hot topics and then flowing in and out. So I do something that like Shannon was saying with comparing with Meg, I kind of like will just be talking and then I just like flow right into the demonstration where Meg is like, you know, we're demoing it, we're doing this piece, I'm explaining everything, and then you go. It's like much more
Yeah,
structured.
she's like, "Okay, guys," and then we're doing that. And I think that structure brings. I think it helps bring the intention to the workout that I think you probably aim for, but balancing that with the community building is fair. I think it's fair.
And one thing that I do, and this has changed over time, and I may go back, but I used to in the beginning coach the whole class a lot and say a lot of things to everyone. And then now I'm more going towards like a really brief overview of like, hey, here's something to work on, and here's some like really big points of performance, the easy ones. And then I just go to each person and just kind of like whisper to them like little things. I've just noticed through my time is that a lot of times people start to glaze over if it lasts more than like 3 or 4 seconds of explanation. And so I was getting frustrated, and this is a me problem, where I would say stuff in the big group of things, and then people
Mm,
would go over and do what I said not to do or not do what I said to do. And I'm just like, well, now I have to say it again. So instead, I just, and this is me just like, evolving as a coach and trying new things. It's just like, all right, brief overview. And then I'm just going to walk to the people and be like, hey, Drew,
mm.
let's work on blah, 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 blah.
I don't think that's a you thing. I think that's a good teaching strategy, right?
Oh,
In the classroom, right? Remember all of the times where you had your teacher pontificating from the front of the. You taking the dog? Okay.
is that a
Sorry.
child or a
It's a
partner?
it's a child taking the dog. Everyone's very excited today. Do you know why everyone's really excited today?
Why?
It's my birthday today. I'm 38 years old today.
Happy birthday,
Why
Drew!
we have the birthday banner.
Yay! Does it say happy
Anyways,
birthday, Drew, on the banner? And when you finish this thought about teaching, which I'm really interested in, I have something else that's negative to say.
so like remember those classes where someone's pontificating from the front of the class, and you have 25 kids in the class, and they're all bored out of their mind because they're when you talk to everybody, that's what happens. So, in fact, in the last few years since I've started CrossFit, a lot of the way that I view my own classroom and my own instruction has brought in some of the same philosophies and strategies that you implement in class.
Oh
So
man.
so it's I think it's a really good approach, right? Like the whole idea that you have this one big broad idea, but everything can be scaled and everything can be differentiated. And while we have these big ideas, you can work with individuals to improve gradually over time, right? That makes a lot of sense educationally. So I
All right.
think you should stick with that model.
You popped him up. Now let me spike him down, okay?
Okay, go ahead.
No, I'm like, oh man, you're telling him that you like implementing some of his teaching strategy. Oh, Drew, come on. Okay, so Elliott, you remember last week or 2 weeks ago when you were saying to me when you're that person in class that Drew's actually described, this outgoing, energetic person, and people tend to rely on you for that. And then when you're not so in the mood to be coaching or to be dealing with other people's bullshit, everybody can see that written right across your face, and that impacts the class.
Yeah, for sure.
What is it? Kettle black or whatever?
Yeah.
pot black or whatever.
Yeah.
Here's the mirror. I think that is tenfold for Mr. Elliott in his classes. The expectation is high. It's going to be a fun class. And when Elliott is tired or he's on, we'll see in a week, day 14 in a row of coaching, it's going to be a different coach. It's going to be a different coach, everybody. And so
It took me like 6 months. Well, before I had a kid, it took me like 6 months to really start just staring at the class when I was coaching all of the classes back in the day, back in like 2000, early 2019 or 2000, late 2018. I was just kind of like,
yeah, the early member days. So like I said, I kind of split this into two parts. And at the end of the day, you got a 9 out of 10 in both of them. One, because I can't give you a 10. But two, I think in the early days, the most important thing was you passed the vibe check. You got me hooked. You showed me that you knew what was going on. But you get a little ding because
I get tired.
You get tired, and that's not necessarily something that you could have controlled in that situation, but I do think that like some of the nuance, and this is probably because we were becoming friends too, and I had a lot of like one-on-one coaching in that time based on when I went to class. But I think some of the pain isn't the right word, but some of the just like disgruntled nature of your situation like bled into class a little bit. Like I knew what was going on with the business to some degree.
Mhm.
And that was just, if you had taken that away, I think you would have had a very clean score. But it was hard. It was hard not to see. I mean, you were going through a lot. You will basically work 365 days that year.
That was really hard. And to slightly defend, I feel that I'm pretty good at compartmentalizing. There's a lot of stuff that goes on, and then I just show up and I do my class, and then but it is difficult doing all of the roles, and that's why I had to hire certain people to do certain things, because it's like really hard for me sometimes to like clean the gym, and then somebody comes in and like spills chalk everywhere, or just like bumps the rower against the wall and then like scrapes it, and like you can see the monitor arm like bending.
Or is
And
like
I
the
can't
10th person to be like, when are we going to get a water bubbler in here?
Yeah. Or it's just like things like that, and it's just like, I know, and I don't wanna right, I don't wanna take that baggage, because even if I don't like somebody, or even if somebody's like a douche or whatever, I still wanna coach them, you know what I mean? It doesn't matter, because they're here to be coached, so I need to just do that. So, it was way easier. I feel like I was a much better coach before I became an affiliate owner, because you're free, right? If equipment breaks, if somebody has a gripe with an issue or the app, it's like, oh, that's that. Like, I'll let so and so know and they can fix it. But any issue or any type of thing, or like me just watching someone about to break something, it's like, anytime a minivan breaks or whatever, it's just kind of like, oh, like $3. Like you know what I mean? It's just, and
Yeah.
it's not that big of a deal, so I can't let it get to me. But to say that, oh, I worry about that later, it's like impossible, right? Somebody goes to your
Yeah.
house and they have dirty shoes and they put their feet up on your couch, and you're kind of just like, do I want to say something, or we just let that?
Yeah.
And
Well,
then
and in that first year, it was like death by a thousand cuts with that kind of stuff because it was just brand new and on top of coaching every single day. I think the other time period and why I tend to ask you about like how I don't want to rehash the whole parenting conversation, but I tend to ask you about like the transition to being a parent because your transition to being a parent was on display for everybody to see how tired you were all the time. So I think that like those two circumstances were, I think it takes a lot for you to start to like be pulled down or to
Most
be
people can
noticeable.
hide at work. They can be
Yeah.
like, I'm just gonna like cash it in today and kind of.
But you kind of have to put on a show 3 times a day, you know, like
Yeah.
that's pretty much what it is. So
Elliott, how do you feel like your coaching has evolved since the beginning? You've been doing this for a really long time. So have you changed styles or changed strategies since, if you look at day one and now you look at today, what's that
Yes.
progression been like?
I would say the biggest difference between when I first started coaching in my first like 2 or 3 years and now is, I mean, it's obviously a bunch of things, but one of the biggest things is that instead of telling people the answer, I either show them or let them figure out the answer. And for the longest time, I would get frustrated because I would tell people what they need to do. And it's not that that's a wrong thing to do, but like now I'll sometimes know what somebody's doing wrong and I'll just ask a question or I won't say anything and eventually they'll figure it out and then they'll come to me and be like, "Hey, I did this and I figured it out." And I think just in terms of some of the things that I've observed over time and how I was led in some of my time in the Navy with some of the amazing leaders that I was around, it's one thing to like be told what you need to do and then you do it and then you're successful, but to build another employee or staff or to build another athlete, there's nothing better than the athlete to know that they were the one that did it.
mm,
And to be it just sticks so much more. So when someone discovers that they need to use their lats in the deadlift without me just saying like, "Oh, use your lats and squeeze your butt." And they're like, "Yeah, yeah, I hear them 100 times." But then when they come to me and be like, you know, I started leaning back a little bit and I like really use my butt. It helps so much. And I'm like, "That's awesome." And then, in the back of my head, I'm like, I say squeeze your butt like 150 times a day. It just that is the biggest thing. So I will watch errors that people make. And to somebody else, like a fairly new coach, they'll kind of think like, well, why aren't you correcting that? Unless it's a safety thing. If they're going to hurt themselves, obviously I'm like, hey, but if it's just a little bit of a technique thing, I try to just get them to figure it out. And that has seemed to stick a lot more than
yeah.
just being like, this is what you need to do. I still tell people what they need to do, but I think some things I really think you have to learn by yourself. And then I would say the other thing that I think I've always done, but now I'm just more aware of it, is how much I affect people's mindsets. Where
Mhm.
I was thinking that I was just getting people fit and getting them to exercise, and then they were seeing the results and they were coming more often. But I think one of the biggest things that you can get from the classes that I coach is like the mindset. And when I'll say I just reframe how people think of things, like, and it seems, and a lot of times it will be seemingly random or seem like a joke, but if you say it enough, it really just becomes less like. I don't like when people call like the assault bike like, oh, that thing's terrible. I'll just say like, it makes your legs feel pretty neat, or it makes your legs feel different, or you're gonna have a wonderful experience, or you're gonna learn something about yourself today in this difficulty. Like, instead of being like, "This is gonna be really bad and you're never gonna wanna do it again."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, people will say things, and then I change the verbiage and say it back to them, and I echo it back differently, and then they kinda smile and laugh it off, and then a couple times, and then they start using that language. And I
That
think it's super important to change the language in which you need to be very careful at the language that you use in terms of like, well, everything in life, but like when around exercise, if you really struggle with being consistent or whatever, you really just need to like be careful what you say inside your mind.
Mm.
that's very much buying into like the whole Stoic philosophy, right? And Marcus Aurelius and in that whole group of thinkers. And I know we've had at least talked about this a little bit, but how long have you been reading and studying on that type of philosophy?
I first got introduced to like that type of stuff in, I think 2018. I was at UNH and we had to read Plato's Symposium. It's just about love and all the different types of love. And then we were just talking about, philosophers and stuff like that. And then I forget how I read, I think somebody, Instagram, what's his name at the time, I think put The Obstacle is the Way Out. And, Stoic philosophy started becoming popular. So it was like in my periphery and I wasn't really paying attention. But then like I have this rule that if a book keeps presenting itself to me over and over and over and over, I'm like, all right, I'm just going to read the book. And Meditations by Marcus Aurelius like kept popping up. But I've been like practicing it. It's not like, oh, I'm going to do that. I'll do it sometimes and then I won't, and see kind of like the differences and stuff like that. And that's why I said, Drew, I don't think like mentally you are any different of an athlete. I think physically you are, but mentally you aren't, because you already had a lot of the, I think, virtuous qualities that an athlete would have to be able to, maximize their limits. Where when we were talking about Shannon, she's changed physically and mentally of like how she approaches things. She's showing up on deadlift days and being like, hey, I'm going to take this seriously. She's like making her, she's putting the same focus on her snatch days as the strict pull-up days, even though she hates it. Like, I immediately just see those things and I'm like, oh, that person's on the way up, like stuff like that.
Can I make a like, maybe, I don't know if it's the flip side of the coin, but like a little bit of an argument for something Elliott could think about? This is my last piece. This is the only reason, and this could maybe be the wrong thing to bring up.
This will be the last piece, and then we'll do we have a question of the day today?
No.
We'll think of a question of the day.
Elliott probably has a question of the day. Okay.
Fantastic.
So I think you're the best coach. My favorite coach is what it is. I've said it here today, folks. Elliott helped me fall in love with CrossFit. But
got to put banner up for that. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Elliott, best coach ever. Sorry, folks who came here for the true roast. But I will say, my biggest piece of feedback for Elliott, and this isn't me asking you to change your mentality, but rather think about meeting people where they are if they're not stoically inclined, let's just say, if they're not subscribing to your mindset yet. Sometimes it's not that simple. That's my feedback for you. I think that you have this very black and white, you guys, it's that simple. It's just go outside and do some burpees, right? Or whatever. You don't even need a gym membership. You don't even need to know anything. But sometimes, and a lot of the times, it really isn't that simple. There are so many things that you can't see that can keep somebody from going outside to do burpees. Like you learning that, hey, if I already spilled the milk, I don't need you to tell me that I spilled the milk. My brain is already telling me you are a freaking loser for spilling milk. So that is, I think, something for you to keep in mind as you approach people who aren't choice with the words that they say to themselves.
Right. Yeah. Some people aren't ready for that type of simplicity. And I understand that. I push people away when I speak the truth, where I'm also not a fan of people like, oh, he really said like some harsh truths. And I'm like, well, how can the truth be harsh? Because it's just true. I think there is ill-timed truth. Like maybe you don't need to say certain things at certain times, even though they're the truth, but they are in fact still the truth. So, but I understand. And most of that rant was for people that already come, like most of my followers on Instagram or people that follow me on Instagram. I hate saying my followers. People that follow me on Instagram already go to the gym. So they were kind of like, I was getting a lot of messages like, yeah. And I'm like,
yeah, there comes a time in everybody's, I think, or anybody's like evolution to making it simple that they need to hear that. that they need to be like, yeah, he's right. It is that simple. All this other noise that I have, whether it's so I have all this other stuff to do for my kids or for my family or for work, like it's a matter of prioritization. It's a matter of moving the needle. And sometimes people need to hear that message, but yeah, timing is everything with that for sure. What do you think, Drew?
I think that's fair. I mean, but I also think.
See, I feel like you have the same mentality.
Well, I mean, I think we live in a society where, and I mean, I don't think like this is, when you compare different societies, like if you compare the culture and society in the United States to that of the Dutch, right? Like there's a very different approach to how truths are conveyed in if you're Dutch, like you're going to hear the truth, and it's going to be very straightforward, and they're very direct. And if we took that and moved it into our society, so many people would be offended. But it's like what Elliott was talking about, like it's how can you be offended by a fact that's truth? So that's where I have a hard time with that. It's like well, it's true, but I do
some people
understand.
don't have the capacity to know that that's truth, right? Because if you're saying to someone, let's just say the example is go outside and do some burpees. If you have somebody who's 100 pounds overweight and whose voice in their head has told them that the truth is you cannot do a burpee. It's not possible for you to do a burpee. And that's happened to them. That voice has been in their head for a decade because somebody said something to them some time ago. Like, I have a lot of people in my life whose voice in their head is central truth and like don't have a lot of capacity to listen outside of that. And I kind of am like, I have like a duality with me of like that inner voice. And if you haven't read the book Chatter, that's another one that I should throw at you, Elliott. It's a good one. But I have that like inner voice that's like telling me these messages, and then I have what I call like my logical brain that's like that doesn't make sense. The truth is, it is that simple. I just need to go do some burpees. But people can't make sense of those two things a lot of the time. So, I mean, maybe that's an American thing.
I shouldn't tell people the truth.
No, I think you should tell people the truth, but just know that there's potential that they don't have the capacity to hear it.
No, I totally understand. And I also understand that I do that in class sometimes and to compare myself and Meg. And that's why so many people love Meg. And they're like, she's so
Meg's
amazing.
pretty good at this. Meg knows the voice in the head too.
Well, it depends how you feel, what you think is good, because like some people will be like Meg will say something and I'll say something and everyone will look at me and be like, you're an asshole. And then Meg says something and be like, Meg, that was so inspirational. Like that made me feel so much better. And I'm like, we said almost the same exact thing. There was just a little bit of different like nuance and stuff. And I like to be a little bit more, like, I don't know, crude or harsh or whatever. Like I said, I don't like to use the word like harsh truth, but just more like blatant with it and just open the box and be like, this is it. Where it's like, some people need to be like, listen, I'm going to open the box and it's going to be okay. No matter what it says, we can think about it, but it's okay. And it's just something we could deal with. And I'm like, oh, you weren't ready for that. Now you're mad at me. Okay. All right.
Yeah. I mean, I guess there's two ways to approach the person who can't get out of their own head. Right. And that's number one is like this surprising statement that maybe makes them think like, whoa, maybe my truth isn't the truth. And that's your approach, right? It's like your mindset was really messed up on that workout, huh? Drop it and leave, right? But there's like the Meg approach, which I've experienced and has been effective for me as well. I think both have been effective for me, but the Meg approach is more like, I just crash and burn in a workout because my voice is like, you suck at deadlifts. Like, you can't do this. I'm slowing down. I'm dropping the bar, whatever. She comes over after, sits Indian style on the ground next to me and is like, hey, I saw that you were really not treating yourself very nicely in that workout, huh? What's going on? She's like she's digging into that voice as opposed to just like startling that voice out of
Right. Because people always say they like, oh, can you turn the music up? Or they put earpods in to like distract themselves. And I will tell people, and this is one of those like weird things that people are like, why did he say that to me? And eventually they may get it, but I say to them like, well, why do you want to drown out the voice? Like you'll never be able to. You need to have conversations with that voice, or like you'll never make friends with that person that's yelling at you in your head if you just drown them out with,
Yeah.
Metallica or whatever. And I think for me, I think I work out without music. Sometimes I work out with really loud music, all that stuff. I do a little bit of different,
Yeah.
but I think it's super important to, like I was saying, like what is the voice in your head if you have one, and to not avoid that. It's like just because you don't check your credit card statements doesn't mean the debt isn't there. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you still gotta
You gotta figure it out.
and the more you ignore the voice, the louder and more consistent it gets. And the more you talk to it, the quieter it gets. And I've just been put in so many scenarios, like when I was in the Navy, of that, like you just had to do things. Like there were just no, like, it's really scary to jump out of a helicopter for the first time. And you never feel ready. And there's a bunch of shit that goes on, and you train in a pool, and then they take you out in a helicopter in the middle of the ocean, and they're like, go. Like that doesn't feel good. But then you just keep doing it and doing it and doing it. And then you get bored. You're like, fuck, I got 3 more jumps. Like you're being lifted up into a helicopter, and you're like, all right, I just got to get 3 more and then we can leave.
Yeah.
It's like, so yeah, maybe the voice is like, stop, quit. You're not going to do this. This is pointless. This hurts. And then eventually it's just like, good.
Yeah. Well, again, plug for the book Chatter if you haven't read that book.
I'll write it down, but it's like
book.
only the second time I've ever heard of it, so you might
Well,
not make those.
Jackie's read it too, so I'll tell her to plug it. But it's like the like little byline or whatever is your inner voice, why it's so important, and how to harness it. That's like the whole general gist of the book. So I think you would like that.
But mine's already harnessed.
Yours is, but in understanding how to help other people harness their inner voice and, to your point, be able to play more of these mind games with people. I think you might find it effective.
I think I really do know how to. I just like
if you're perfect, then that's fine.
No.
Don't read it.
I'm saying I purposefully will ignore certain people's wants. And like it would be nicer if you were nicer to me. And it's like, well, you don't need more nice. Like a bunch of people are nice to you. You need a little bit different. So, and that's why and sometimes I do it wrong, and I'm like, I'm a little too abrasive, or a little too that, or that person didn't need that, and they were a little closer to the edge than I was perceiving, and stuff like that. Like sometimes people will leave and I'll be like, shit, I went a little too far. I poked at Drew just a little too much, but he'll bounce back.
Yeah. The timing of, because I did write that too on my list of like good things with communication is, for me at least, you gave it to me straight at the right time, I think. But that giving it to somebody straight is piercing for sure. So when you do that is everything. Sometimes we need our Meg to come in.
Absolutely.
And let us know that somebody cares and somebody sees our pain.
I also would agree that if we didn't have Meg, I would also be more I would be less
split the road.
sharp.
Yeah.
I would do both then, but she takes on such a great role of doing all of that and being so amazing, where I get to just be the guy that just comes in and be like, hey, you were slow or whatever.
Do you like, so Meg and I were talking about this the other day, and I know we probably have to close soon, but I know like when I was coaching dance, and it was a little different because I was working with a lot of kids. It was all kids, but like even only after a few months, like you start to like worry about them. And like I would have dreams where it'd be like, oh, like somebody didn't do well in the dance and they cried afterwards, or just like I would just think about them all the time. And so Meg and I were talking about this, where because she's on vacation right now, and was like, oh, I'm going to be thinking about you guys. I'll probably have dreams about you guys. And so we were just talking about like that you worry about the people that you're coaching, and you invest in them in their life. Do you Do you experience that, or do you kind of have like you shut it off when you're at home?
I mean, it's kind of my whole life. I
That's
do
what I
okay
assumed, but
compartmentalizing, but like you don't do the gym thing, like, showing up every day and coaching, but like I built an entire business on doing this stuff. So
mm-hmm.
it's kind of like sometimes when people will be like, oh, the coach or whatever, blah, 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 cares so much and they show up every day and it's like, well, have you tried like owning and operating a business that does that and coach? Like you got to be all in, or at
Yeah.
least like 90%. It's tough. I mean, you could ask my wife. She's not excited about how I'm up at, oh, I can't sleep. I wake up or I'm, not going to bed because I'm fucking around with the focus board and still spelling shit wrong. Or, I'm messaging people uh on Facebook and reaching out to them and emailing, and am I just like, sometimes I just want to be like, and just like move all the curtain back and just like CC everyone on every email, and you just be like, holy shit, there's like, fucking, all right.
There's some dumb questions coming in. Is that what you're telling us?
No. It's like, wow, he's like reaching out to a lot of people that, different need it. And some people just push me away and other people.
Yeah.
And I think another hard thing is like you develop relationships, and regardless if people leave or not, like I have, like 100 friends that break up with me and then come back into my life. And I have to be like, and that's why I joke about like, well, I don't have feelings, so you can't really hurt my feelings. Cause like, it's just, I can't get too invested in certain people because like, stuff like that. Cause then
Yeah.
it just really gets, because if I have people breaking up with me every single month and then new relationships, stuff like that. So
speaking of people, that's my segue into our closing question here.
Okay.
If you were to have lunch with anybody, dead or alive, who would it be? Do you want me to start?
Yes.
Julia Roberts.
No, because you're gonna eat great. Is that really the answer?
I don't know.
Oh, why
She was the
Julia?
first person that came to mind. I would have
I'm
lunch with Julia
thinking.
Roberts.
I'm thinking of Julia Childs.
Julia Child. Why would I? Lunch with
I'm
Julia
thinking because you
Child?
want to have a good lunch.
Like I was like, where did you go with that?
Why
You're gonna eat great.
Julia Roberts? Why
I was-
Julia Roberts? What are you attracted to her or something?
Isn't she just so great? She's got a great smile.
I mean, she's got a big mouth. Yeah.
No.
I think
She
I
did.
would.
Go
I
ahead.
think
I was going to talk about Julia Roberts more. Go ahead.
No. Okay. I think I would have good conversation with either Bruce Lee, or I would really like to talk to, and it depends how open they're going to be. Cause some people just like won't like, but either like a Michael Jordan or like a Tom Brady type person where you're just like, what are you actually seeing differently? Like what's happening here? Like obviously
Yeah.
everybody it's the people that, and to not just get people that, because people write books and speculate on this topic, you like want to hear from the person, and it would be nice to have like Michael Jordan and his coach there so they can bounce back and forth. But it'd be like, it's one thing to get to the top, but then to separate yourself from the top of the top and just still become like, that's such an interesting, because you can't tell me like, oh, I just wanted it more. Like, do you know how many professional
Yeah.
athletes wanted it more than Michael Jordan or whatever? It's like it eventually becomes like a process, and there's something that it just shifts your perception of like, oh, I never even thought of it that way. Like I just thought I had to practice basketball, but they're doing some like all other weird shit.
Well,
Bruce Lee.
I don't know. I don't really have any like celebrities I can think of that I would want to like pick their brain. I think for me, and I'm lucky that I haven't really lost many people in my life that have been important to me. I lost my grandmother, so obviously having lunch with her would be cool. But I think I would be, if this is an option, Drew, you can tell me if this is not an option. But I would love to have lunch and pick the brain of my mom at 23 years old.
Totally an option.
Yeah, that's what I would like to do. Mm-hmm. Because
that's a good one.
Yeah, got to figure out where that head was at.
And just for what it's worth, I would change my answer. I would
Oh.
definitely have lunch with Donald Trump, figure that all out, and then go to lunch with Julia Roberts afterwards.
Just lighten the mood.
Would be good.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, boys. And that was the not so spicy roast of T. Elliott Field.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. Please like and subscribe. Leave a comment of your least favorite thing about Coach Elliott.
Wow.
Beautiful.
Okay.
That was excellent.